Your Excellency, Prime Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Musalia Mudavadi, esteemed members of the Cabinet of the Republic, my dear colleagues, Principal Secretaries, different members of government here present, my colleagues from the State Department of Foreign Affairs. Your Excellency, this morning we are filled with joy. The joy of sharing this space with you is something we don't take for granted. We requested you, Your Excellency, to join us on this occasion because we are cognizant of your responsibility. As stipulated in the Constitution in Article 131, by which you are head of government and also head of state. 2 days ago, Your Excellency, Prime Cabinet Secretary hosted a validation meeting in this very space. It is a meeting that brought together a wide range of Kenyans to reflect on the draft foreign policy of the Republic that we have been developing since July. Your Excellency, 12 consultative meetings have taken place with different sectors of our society, and based on their views, we now have a draft document that was validated under the leadership of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. And so today's meeting, Your Excellency, is really quite brief because the intention of it is to hear the vision of the #1 diplomat of the Republic of Kenya in the person of His Excellency, the President. Because that's who you are, sir. You are the embodiment of the Republic in its relations with states and multilateral organizations around the world. You are the voice of Kenya. You are the #1 marketer of the Republic. And therefore, it is important, Your Excellency, that we hear what your thoughts are before we finalize this policy. And so, Your Excellency, my role this morning is really quite basic. Allow me to, because I have a presentation later on, allow me, Your Excellency, to ask my dear colleague and sister Roslyn Njogu to come and make her observations, and then that will allow us, Your Excellency, to move forward. Thank you very much. Put our hands together for Roslyn.
Thank you, my brother, here Sing'oei. His Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief. His Excellency, Professor Kithure Kindiki, Deputy President and my teacher. His Excellency Musalia Mudavadi, Waziri Mkuu and our boss. Many Excellencies, Cabinet Secretaries, my colleague PSAs, the chair of the Committee for Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations, Honorable Koech, and the chair for the Diaspora and Migrant Affairs Committee, Honorable Haika. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from the ministry, ambassadors, excellencies, good morning. Good morning. Mine is really very small, Your Excellency. It's to ask the question, what does a well-done foreign policy do? How do we feel, touch, and understand a well-done foreign policy? I'm going to talk about 3 things quickly that foreign policy has done for us in the embodiment of the State Department for Diaspora Affairs. The diaspora pillar has always been a pillar of the foreign policy of Kenya. But giving it flesh, giving it budget, and giving it energy has allowed us to do many things to grow our diplomacy. It has allowed us to protect the 4 million Kenyans who live abroad, has allowed us to run evacuation programs when those Kenyans have been in distress, such as in Sudan. Your Excellency, we were the first country to get our citizens home, such as the ongoing evacuation out of Lebanon, where so far we have received 300 distressed Kenyans from Lebanon, and that process is ongoing. But also it has allowed us to extend protection through ensuring documentation is done for our diaspora everywhere, including running the Mobile Consular Services program that has allowed us to serve Kenyans in 175 different cities in the 2 years that we have been in business. Your Excellency, what does a well-done foreign policy do as far as diaspora remittances are concerned? It allows us to put money, programs, and people to create an incentive framework for remittances. And Your Excellency, I'm happy to announce that we see an upward trend as far as the remittances that come from this country. We last year reported $4.2 billion US, which, as you know, is higher than the remittance, the foreign exchange that comes from tea, coffee, tourism, and I'm not trying to start anything with the PSs for tourism, for agriculture, and so on. But Your Excellency, that number is critical because it comes from less than 4 million people sending money in small ticket sizes to their homes. Your Excellency, it allows us to think about people who have been on the margins and how to keep them connected to their homeland. Countries that have supported their diasporas have done well. And we have examples everywhere, from Ireland, from Israel, from India, and so on, and we can see the work that has been done by those diasporas. Ensuring that our foreign policy has legs and has had diaspora diplomacy at its heart has ensured then that we've been able to keep our diaspora connected and help them achieve more and more of their rights. Your Excellency, I'm currently hosting a delegation from the diaspora who are here to meet with various members of Bunge to talk about electoral law reform and to see how they can take even more part in the work that we do. So, Your Excellency, this process of redoing the foreign policy of Kenya and doing it in such an open way that allows various stakeholders to fresh impetus will allow us to feel, touch this thing that is called diplomacy and this thing that is called the foreign policy. I want to thank you, Your Excellency, and I want to thank my colleague, P.S. Sing'oei and Waziri wetu, Dr. Musalia Mudavadi, for the leadership on this process, and to say that, Your Excellency, we look forward to hearing the direction from you and to having a foreign policy that we all will be able to support and get behind. Asante sana.
Another round of applause for P.S. Roslin. On your programs, Your Excellency, there is a presentation which is captured as a video presentation. I think somebody at State House was a bit mischievous, thinking that I would be away and that we would speak via video. But I'm here personally, and so I'd like to make a quick presentation. May I ask our ICT people to just put up the presentation, please. I think the presentation, first and foremost, Your Excellency, like I said, is summative of our foreign policy draft that has been developed consultatively by an interministerial team. It is important to say that it's not been developed merely by a team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because our understanding from the word go is that this is a whole of government business. And so at the beginning of July, when the Prime Cabinet Secretary asked me to initiate this process, Your Excellency, we put together an interministerial team. And I want to ask members of the technical committee that was in charge of this review process to just be upstanding so that we can recognize you. They were led by Ambassador Kiruthu, who is the Deputy Director General for bilateral within the ministry. Thank you very much. Let's put our hands together. In summary, Your Excellency, that's the outline of the presentation. We start with our diplomatic footprint. The formation or the formulation process for this policy, like I mentioned, was consultative. We will outline the draft policy. We will reflect on the 2014 Kenya foreign policy pillars. the focus areas of the current proposed policy, how we intend to implement it, to monitor and to evaluate it, and the next steps. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, that is our diplomatic footprint. 60 years down the line, since the commencement of our diplomacy, we now have footprints in well over 68 geographies. You can see the spread is largely in Africa, 29, 15 in Europe, 6 in the Americas, 9 in Asia, 9 in the Middle East. I think in the Americas, actually, it's going to change in about 2 weeks because there's a 7th one coming up, which is a consulate we are setting up in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. But Your Excellency, this footprint has been put here for a reason, because when you compare it with our neighbors, our footprint, given our ambition, is still inadequate. Now, our friends in South Africa have 103 missions abroad. With the kind of mandate you have given us, Your Excellency, including on diaspora affairs, including on candidature, it increasingly becomes evident to us that we do not have sufficient coverage. And so part of the conversation we need to have is whether that we have is sufficient. Next slide, please. The journey we started in July, Your Excellency, has led us along a path of consultation. We have consulted widely, reached experts in maritime affairs, in health, in peace and security in academia, in the media, in civil society, including in the judiciary. And so, Your Excellency, it is our view that we have undertaken consultative processes that are compliant with the Constitution of the Republic. If you notice, Your Excellency, it's only one major consultation that is still outstanding to our mind, which is the consultation with yourself, namely this particular forum. Next slide, please. So we've come up with a 6-chapter document, a document that speaks in chapter 1 on our prioritized national interests and values. And the point here, Your Excellency, is that the reason for foreign policy is the promotion of the national interest, the fostering of our national interest. And part of the conversation we need to have is what is the national interest? An examination of our Constitution suggests certain elements that fit into the matrix of the national interest. In particular, Article 138 of the Constitution speaks to the question of territorial integrity and stability, the protection of the commonwealth, of the citizenry and the citizenry's well-being. It speaks to the entitlements of the citizens, namely their rights and their freedoms, amongst others. And these are some of the interests that are prioritized that we need to protect using our foreign policy. Your Excellency, the 2nd chapter examines the operating environment and basically asks why are we reviewing the 2014 policy. And in examining the operating environment, it's obvious, Your Excellency, that many changes have taken place in the operating environment. On the economic sphere, we are dealing with complex challenges around fiscal challenges and debt. We are dealing with challenges around climate. We are dealing with opportunities around the demographic shift and many others. But increasingly also we are dealing with not just a resurgence, but a strengthening of agency on the part of various organs of the state and also citizens. Parliament is playing a role in foreign policy, the judiciary, county governments, academia, private sector, civil society, the media is asking questions, young people are asking questions, and that's why we're having this conversation. Additionally, when you look at things from an international lens, it is evident, Your Excellency, that the fabric of the global order, the fabric of the international order is considerably punctured. The parchment by which global order is sustained is threatened. And the key question revolves around, do we repair this parchment? Do we repair this fabric or reform it? Or do we replace it? And Your Excellency has been at the center of conversations around reform of the international architecture, and we are very anxious, Your Excellency, to hear your thoughts in that respect. Your Excellency, the third chapter then considers the tools of diplomacy, the tools of foreign policy, namely bilateral and multilateral engagements, but also an emerging concept known as plurilateral engagements, which is really about the realization that because the parchment of the international order is ruptured, because multilateralism is not delivering as it ought, interest-based institutions are beginning to cohere. They may not be as structured, but you can begin to see an emergence of new institutional formations, and we will have that discussion. The fourth chapter, Your Excellency, then presents what our foreign policy options are, and then we consider in chapter 5 and 6 implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, this is a fairly important slide because it asks whether Kenya has a foreign policy doctrine. What is Kenya's foreign policy doctrine? What is our foreign policy philosophy? Do we have a default position to guide our interactions at the international level? How do we want to project the country? That is really the conversation that's taking place in that particular chapter. And the proposition here, Your Excellency, is that we are guided by a strong belief that our future is very much linked to the stability, security of our republic, and the common heritage of all of us. So this sense of Kenya existing within a community of nations is set out. And that linked to the stability and prosperity of our neighbors in East Africa and the rest of the continent lies Kenya's stability. Your Excellency, we've been guided since independence by very clear principles. The principle of good neighborliness. This is something we should be proud of. Kenya is a good neighbor within the region. The idea that we do not interfere with the internal affairs of other countries. The idea that we believe that we can resolve our issues guided by the Pan-African spirit. You that we will act fairly and reciprocally with others or towards others. The idea, Your Excellency, that we will welcome those in distress through our humanitarianism, and that's the reason why Kenya is a big refugee hosting country. Today, we are hosts to more than 700,000 refugees around the country. More fundamentally, Your Excellency, is a principle of non-alignment. Because we now live in a fairly complex geography globally, our non-alignment has served us. One of the principles that is not captured there, Your Excellency, which I hope we can be able to discuss, is the fact that Kenya's recognition of other states is contingent upon the recognition of those states by the United Nations. And so where there is a tension between our recognition of the state at the regional level, we look mainly at the extent to which the United Nations has recognized those states. So for example, by well over 146 countries, that's a. And so, certain other states, including those that aspire to be states, such as, Kosovo, such as Western Sahara, and others that are not really recognized under the rubric of the UN, even though in certain contexts within the AU system, they may have some form of recognition. I think Kenya's position has been that until and unless we have affirmative recognition from the United Nations, then we do not give them that recognition. Your Excellency, like I said, since independence, Kenya has successfully forged mutually beneficial alliances with both the West and the East. And again, going back to the idea of recognition, Your Excellency, I think this is also a good place to mention one other country, which is the idea of Taiwan. And the reason why Kenya stands for the proposition of one China policy is because when you look at Taiwan, it is recognized only by 8 countries. So it hasn't met the threshold of recognition. And so with regard to, our commitment to the one China policy, it's actually based on a very solid principle. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, that's the 2014 policy proposition in summary. If you look at that slide, what does that tell you? We envisioned in 2014 that we would build the house of foreign policy. This is like a house sitting on 5 pillars. It's very clear, it's very linear, if you like. It's stable also. But it's unbending, because if you remove any of those pillars, will the house stand? And the key question is, does our policy stand necessarily on any one pillar? And part of the criticism around this approach has been that, that the policy projection in this manner sort of makes Kenya's approach very, very rigid. There's little view of the interaction between different pillars, and therefore one doesn't get the full view of how we drive our policy. But nevertheless, Your Excellency, this policy framework has served us since independence, because we have been leaders in the peace frontier, and increasingly from 2002, we have been running on an economic diplomacy trajectory, as well as environmental trajectory, diaspora, as well as cultural diplomacy. Next slide, please. The next slide essentially captures, and I think it's a bit repetitive because we've discussed this, reviewing the foreign policy. I think we asked what are the determinants, what are the drivers of this review process, and like I mentioned earlier, we looked at the external environment, our national ambitions captured in the bottom-up economic transformation agenda and Vision 2030. And we also looked, Your Excellency, at the demands from the bottom, from non-state actors and other institutions, all of which collectively influence the strategic direction of our diplomatic efforts. But more fundamentally, like I mentioned, since 2014, many global shifts have been witnessed and continue to shape foreign policies world over, including Kenya. Most fundamentally, Your Excellency, I think you recall in 2020 with COVID, the world suddenly turned its attention on the impact of health and the dangers that public health can pose on peace and security. And therefore, the nexus between global health and peace began to be examined. The other important factor in that regard, Your Excellency, is technology, the ubiquity of technology, and the fact that technology has now horizontalized access to information. The information available to government is more or less the information that is available to the citizen. And that has democratized the information space, but it has also created considerable challenges. Your Excellency, we have emerging areas of diplomacy, including parliamentary. Like I mentioned, Parliament is playing a very important role. The judiciary also, in the judicial interpretation of the law, is developing areas of diplomacy. The ocean is becoming a very important site for diplomacy. We have done a lot of conference-related diplomacy and public diplomacy. Your Excellency, we have, like I said, received views from all those actors, and we continue to evaluate and adapt our foreign policy for relevance and effectiveness. Next slide, please. So, Your Excellency, this is sort of the way we envision the new focus areas of our foreign policy. So away from the house of diplomacy, the house of foreign policy that we had in 2014, I don't know what this chart sort of triggers in our minds. To me, I see a leopard skin in the variegated colors that you see. Is that to say that because the world has become even more complex and more unpredictable, we will be more adaptive, more agile, maybe even a little more camouflaged in order to deal with the habitats that is a world that is a lot more complex? Or is it like some people have said, that this now looks like a plane that is about to take off, with global sustainability as the cockpit and the whole of government as the tail, and the two ends of bilateralism and multilateralism being sort of the wings that will enable these, our diplomacy, to take off even much more strongly into the future. But again, Your Excellency, these are the focus areas of our diplomacy. The idea really being that we have tried to capture the non-linearity of the environment. We have also sought to capture the interactions between, for example, the diaspora and our socio-cultural diplomacy. The role that our diaspora could play in global governance and in multilateralism. But all of it, Your Excellency, is still anchored on the idea of driving the national interest. The hypothesis of this foreign policy is to argue that all these factors play a dynamic and interactive role in the furtherance of our foreign policy, resting on the idea that it will be driven by the whole of government, tapping and taking advantage of both our bilateral relations, which is mainly driven by our missions abroad and the missions that we host here, as well as the institutions of multilateralism that exist. Next slide, please. What we have in the next slides, Your Excellency, are really a breakdown of each of those areas, and I will not really take so much time in them. It is obvious, Your Excellency, that Kenya is a champion on peace and security. And this particular pillar, Your Excellency, or this particular focus area aims to safeguard Kenya's sovereignty and territorial integrity, preserve democracy and fundamental human rights, and ensure the prosperity and well-being of our people. Your Excellency, the bottom-up economic transformation focuses heavily on the need to expand our economy and the opportunities available to our people, and that is why we have economic and commercial diplomacy, which seeks to achieve robust economic and commercial engagements in order to secure Kenya's socio-economic development and prosperity with the broad aim of becoming an upper-middle income and industrialized nation. Your Excellency, you have prioritized intra-African trade and regional economic integration while strengthening trade and commercial engagements globally. In this area, Your Excellency, of economic and commercial diplomacy, we have sites of trade and investment, tourism, creative economy, conferencing, amongst others. Thirdly, Your Excellency, the issue around sustainable oceans. Let's move to the next slide. We argue that Kenya will strengthen her position as a regional and global leader in oceans and blue economy, and contribute meaningfully to global efforts in ocean governance. The main focus here will be promotion of sustainable development and management of the oceans and blue economy sector, enhancing maritime shipping, logistics, safety and security, promoting coastal and marine tourism. Your Excellency, Kenya will explore and develop ocean resources, protect marine and domain and boundaries, combat threats within the maritime sphere, enhance cooperation, and contribute to equitable sharing of oceans and marine resources and benefits. Next slide, please. Your Excellency, the focus of our policy will continue in the direction of enhancing our engagement around global governance and multilateral diplomacy, by which we will seek to provide proactive leadership in global governance by promoting equitable representation, multilateralism, and strategic collaboration to address emerging challenges and safeguard national interest. Kenya will continue to advocate for a more representative, fairer, and equitable international system that incorporates, reflects, and amplifies the voices of the Global South. Your Excellency, we will continue to work on the promotion of consensus building, respect for international law, and a rule-based international order. Next slide, please. On environmental and climate change diplomacy, Your Excellency, Kenya is a champion when it comes to matters climate change, because our energy security, Your Excellency, is predicated on green energy by and large. And when it comes to the environment, Your Excellency, Kenya is at the heart of environmental diplomacy by way of hosting UNEP and UN Habitat. And so the aim here is to promote global environmental sustainability through the preservation of natural resources, effective international collaboration, robust policy frameworks, and innovative strategies that support climate adaptation, biodiversity protection, and sustainable development. And we will seek to showcase our credentials as a global leader on environmental and climate change issues and renewable energy. On science and tech and innovation, Your Excellency, the aim here is to integrate various forms of STI to build a robust ecosystem to achieve Kenya's national interests and position the country as a key player in global technological discourse. Your Excellency, we will promote partnerships to support cutting-edge technologies, including AI, to create jobs, spur economic growth, and improve the welfare and living standards of Kenyans. We shall leverage on Kenya's commitment to international collaborations and partnerships aimed at attracting critical investments and fostering the exchange of knowledge for addressing global challenges. Your Excellency, the last two pillars are diaspora diplomacy, which my sister has spoken to quite a great deal, hinged on a conceptual framework that protects, engages, and empowers the Kenyan diaspora community to enhance their prosperity and that of the nation, and to leverage on diaspora to promote Kenya's interests abroad, including employment in strategic positions in regional and international organizations. On social-cultural diplomacy, the aim of which is to harness social-cultural opportunities in the international arena, especially through the promotion of social values, cultural heritage, and endowments as tools to build relationships, foster understanding, and influence other nations. The focus here, Your Excellency, will be on cultural heritage, sports, education, and global health diplomacy. In relation to the implementation and the monitoring and evaluation of this policy, Your Excellency, this is predicated on an efficient and professional foreign service, working in collaboration with other MDAs through a whole of government and society approach, both at the national and county governments. A monitoring and evaluation policy will be guided by the National Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. Your Excellency, other documents have been prepared to bolster this draft policy. A cabinet memo will come before you. And to implement the policy much more coherently, Your Excellency, it is proposed, and I know the Prime Cabinet Secretary will speak to this, that a sessional paper on Kenya's foreign policy be elaborated. We are also undertaking further reviews of Foreign Service Act 2021 and development of Foreign Service regulations. Intend with your permission and your blessing, to launch the Kenya foreign policy. Thereafter, or rather, we intend to launch the drafts, and then thereafter, that draft will go before Cabinet, which will give rise to the development of a sessional paper, a revised act, and foreign service regulations. Your Excellency, last, we will engage in a sensitization exercise by which we will engage Kenyans on the new Kenya's foreign policy. Your Excellency, that is in a nutshell the draft foreign policy that we seek to present to you. And now, without further ado, allow me to invite to the stage His Excellency, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, to take it over from there. Let's put our hands together for the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, Your Excellency, the Deputy President, the Honorable Kindiki Kithure, my colleagues in government, fellow Kenyans and participants in this very business-like and short but critical consultation with the President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, I can only say that the PS has done in running us through the outline of the emerging or evolving foreign policy. But why we thought that it's so important is because we want to be able to domesticate foreign policy. In the middle of this year, when the young men and women of Kenya were raising some concerns, they kept on asking this question: why does the President travel? Not looking at the end result, but why does he travel? It even migrated from why to the mode of travel. And in the process, critical aspects of what emerges out of proper engagement at the highest level was being lost in that conversation. So it is our desire that through this kind of interaction, under your leadership, Your Excellency, we can perhaps coin something that we might call foreign policy machinani, so that we can get the ordinary citizen, the young men and women of this country, to understand why it is important for a nation to engage with the globe. Try and imagine yourself living in a country with a dormant foreign policy. A nation that is like an introvert, does not interact with anybody, does not talk to anybody. What kind of nation would that be? The reality is that the President of Kenya, in the 2.5 years or so since he took over, have dramatically reprofiled Kenya's image in the international arena. I can speak with confidence because I've made so many trips. And the question in some of these fora is that, and what does Kenya say? What does Kenya think? That is important. For you, some of you who are politicians here, you know how it feels when you are at a public rally and a particular speaker speaks, and then when he walks away and leaves the arena, and you find the audience disappearing with him. It happens. But Kenya is becoming a pivotal state, a reference center, a nation where people want to know and ask and seek guidance from. That does not come easy, neither does it come lightly. So through this kind of conversation, how do we anchor Kenya's foreign policy? Through this conversation, how do we support it? How do we make sure that the budgeting process of our nation properly supports the foreign policy initiative, bearing in mind there are also competing interests in other sectors? These are issues that can only come through if we build sufficient consensus and be able to direct and know that what we are looking for has an impact on our people. So, Your Excellency, I was not setting you up, but I was just saying, they were asking, why do you travel? And that was a very telling statement. It meant that there's a communication gap that we need to fill as a nation, so that the bulk of our citizens can understand why international engagements, why meeting international obligations is important, both for our sovereignty, for our security, and for our economic well-being. So I will not say any more, because the President will, we are eagerly waiting to hear from you and to guide us so that the final documentation really captures the mood, the tone, the thought, the punch that you desire for this country. It is now my singular honor to invite the Honorable Kithure Kindiki, our Deputy President, to come and make his remarks, and then invite His Excellency the President.
Your Excellency, President William Ruto, and all the dignitaries present here, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Kenyans, Your Excellency, the last 2 years, you've profiled our country tremendously across the world. No wonder the statements which my brother here, PCS, has made are the sentiments that are not only prevailing in Kenya, but also out there. And that's how it should be. Because, Your Excellency, other than being president and the CEO of our country, you're also our head of state and our chief diplomat, and the embodiment of what Kenya is, its values, and what its interests are. Your Excellency, this forum, and I want to congratulate the Foreign Affairs Ministry led by PCS Musalia and the PSs and everyone who has participated in this. This forum is a point of reflection and introspection on, number one, what is our national interest? And that question we will ask for as long as Kenya exists. It's not a one-off thing that we define and that's it. We have to keep on asking, what is our national interest? And as the ministry has presented through this draft and the stakeholders who prepared this draft, our national interest lies in some of the most sacred and bedrock principles that are espoused in our Constitution, including, but not limited to, the inviolability of our country. And everywhere, every inch of Kenya, where the flag flies and where the national anthem is sung, that space called Kenya is inviolable. It is the embodiment of our pride and should be protected at all costs. But it's also about our values, which is the software that runs Kenya, our culture, and our aspirations. Thirdly, it's also reflected in the bottom-up economic transformation agenda and Vision 2030, which aspires to provide a more inclusive country and greater sharing of the wealth and the resources of Kenya to benefit the entire population of Kenya, and to pull as many people from our homeland, from dehumanizing poverty and sharing the ecological, natural, and the other resources that are available in our country to the benefit of as many people as we can. Your Excellency, that's the national interest, in my view. But it's also about the security and stability of our country. That leads me, as I move towards the conclusion of these remarks, to also say this, our national interest, is essential to our national survival. And therefore, this foreign policy is about the sustainability of our country in the decades and centuries to come. What is that will make Kenya survive in this very complex, competitive, and insecure world? Many decades when this generation might not be here, many centuries, obviously, when all of us will not be here. Is it not in making sure our country is stable as you continue to lead us, Your Excellency? Is it not in making sure that we protect the resources in our country, make them available to the majority of the citizens, fight corruption, and make sure that the national wealth is used to benefit the country, projecting ourselves and selling our image out there as a country which is good for investment, which is good for business, and which can attract the resources from outside this country to come and benefit our people? Those are the questions that this foreign policy review should help us answer. And therefore, I am very, very, very proud as a citizen of this country that we are reflecting on these things at a time like this, and at a time when we are witnessing many changes across the world, the stress around existing multilateral systems, the emergence of plural systems, as has been said here, and how do we harness all these divergent developments for the benefit of our country. And therefore, we will want to listen to Your Excellency and hear what vision you have for us, and how do we take cue, those of us who are serving in your administration, how do we take cue from that vision to help us navigate the interests of Kenya and make sure that we hand over this country to future generations, a stable country, united country, prosperous country that can sustain the shocks that are prevailing today and those that will come in the future. With those many remarks, Your Excellency, I want to request all my colleagues to be upstanding and welcome His Excellency the President to give us his vision with a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take our seats. Asanteni sana. Your Excellencies, honorable members, fellow Kenyans, let me first take this opportunity to congratulate the team led by our Prime Cabinet Secretary and the two departments of Foreign Affairs and of Diaspora Affairs for what I have seen is a job very well done. Congratulations from us. And today we mark a significant milestone in the crucial process of reviewing and consolidating our foreign policy into a comprehensive document. This policy reflects our strategic responses to global imperatives at both bilateral and multilateral levels, defines the values and principles driving our responses, and articulates our objectives as a nation. This transformation is timely, coming at the expiry of the shelf life of our 2014 foreign policy document that had been developed again in a concerted effort the way this one has been. Our foreign policy must align with the dynamic realities of both domestic and the international environment. Kenya's pursuit of national economic transformation necessitates a forward-looking, robust, patriotic, and people-centered foreign policy that will attract investments and secure our country's rightful place on the global stage. At its core, Kenya's foreign policy is more than the management of relations with other nations. It's about shaping a destiny for present and future generations that aligns with our national interests. This policy, therefore, ensures that diplomatic engagements deliver tangible benefits to every Kenyan, unlocking the power of cooperation, the promise of partnerships, and the potential of a shared vision for a prosperous and interconnected future for our nation. The time has come to dismantle the barriers that have traditionally confined foreign affairs to the executive. Instead, we must adopt a comprehensive, inclusive, whole of government and all of society approach involving parliament, the judiciary, civil society, faith-based organizations, our young people, women, and also all other active stakeholders. At the same time, our foreign policy must provide a sound framework for effective strategies that serve our national objectives, priorities, and interests through diplomatic engagement. Let me say this, that each and every one of us, whether we are members of the judiciary, members of parliament, members of civil society, whether we are sportsmen, whether we are business people, we represent Kenya in engagements with others. And therefore, we have a diplomatic responsibility to represent our country well. Its ultimate aim, naturally, is to improve citizen welfare, drive national progress, and contribute to shared regional and global prosperity. Globalization has driven intensive integration and interdependence, blurring the line between domestic and foreign policy. This makes it imperative to redefine and reestablish a distinct, comprehensive foreign policy framework. And this is the exercise this ministry is engaged in. The new foreign policy document outlines clear objectives, identifies emerging trends, and proposes effective responses to global dynamics. It incorporates mechanisms for implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, ensuring that our diplomatic sector serves as a catalyst for Kenya's prosperity. Notably, it highlights opportunities in emerging fields, such as the digital diplomacy and climate diplomacy. As you all know, we progressively have raised Kenya's diplomatic profile. It is the reason why, for the first time in Nairobi, we held the first ever African Climate Summit in Nairobi. And I did it specifically because Nairobi is the environmental capital of the world, and we must lead in matters environmental diplomacy. It is the reason why our voice as a country is counted on by our African friends, by the global community, and we carry the weight of the fact that Kenya hosts the United Nations Environmental Program, and it is the reason why we have leveraged on it to raise the profile of our country and to make sure that Kenya plays in the right league. And I am looking forward to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs continuously managing that space in a manner that profiles Kenya positively. Without a doubt, economic diplomacy remains central to our foreign policy. Kenya's position as a regional financial hub, backed by a strong banking sector and hosting the largest World Bank station outside Washington, underscores its importance. Recent engagements, including the African Development Bank and IDA summits, have emphasized the critical role of the private sector, youth, and civil society in economic diplomacy. When I was requested by the World Bank to host the IDA negotiations in Nairobi, when I was requested by the president of the Africa Development Bank to also host their summit in Nairobi, it demonstrated Kenya's new profile as a destination and as a voice for economic diplomacy. We must build on it, we must leverage on it, and whatever it is that we are doing, whether it is with the World Bank or the Africa Development Bank, must eventually accrue benefits to the people of Kenya. Our foreign policy must, therefore, advance the strategy of creating more and better trade and economic opportunities for industries and enterprises, with a special focus on the empowerment of small and medium enterprises and the inclusion of marginalized groups such as young people, women, and persons living with disability. In so doing, our foreign policy dovetails with a bottom-up economic transformation agenda. To benefit from this complementarity and alignment, it is time for us to be imaginative in order to enhance the capacity and the efficacy of our missions abroad and use them to promote trade and promote investment and position Kenya as appropriately as they can. Our nation's reputation as a dependable peace and security actor is a source of pride. Kenya has established strong credentials in the area of regional, Pan-African, and global peace and security engagements and operations. Our long-standing tradition of effective peacemaking, peace building, and peacekeeping has defined us as a force of common good in our region, in our continent, and globally. And sustaining this positive legacy is an important strategic priority for us. I expect the ministry to continuously focus in this space. It is the reason why we are engaged in all the interventions. Now in South Sudan, we're also engaged in the main Sudan. We are engaged in Somalia. We've just come out of DRC. And the global community approached Kenya to take our place in Haiti. It was not because of any other reason. It was because Kenya has positioned itself as a country that understands peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace diplomacy has been, over time, a place where Kenya excelled. And it is our intention, and I'm sure you will put into the finer detail of this document on how Kenya can leverage on that space to make sure that we not only play our role, but we also profile our country positively. This is why, at the moment, Kenya is leading the UN-approved multinational security support mission in Haiti and mediating peace efforts in different parts of our region, including South Sudan, as I have said, Sudan, and across the region. We are determined to remain a peaceful nation, at peace with ourselves first, at peace with our neighbors, and also working with friends across the world. Under the Shirika Plan, which is another huge invention of Kenya, our innovative refugee program, we aim to transform camps into integrated settlements, setting a global standard for sustainable and affirmative humanitarian response. I had, for example, an engagement with the UN representative of Matters Refugees, and they are working with other countries that have refugees, learning from Kenya how to integrate refugees and how people who have lived in a country for 30 years cannot continue to stay in camps, how we can integrate them into society and how we can use them as a force of good. And we are making huge strides in that space. I hope this policy document will capture the innovative measures we have taken with our refugees, use them to profile our country, use them for matters diplomacy so that we can contribute to the welfare of not just refugees in our country, but refugees living everywhere in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not new to climate diplomacy. Our country has a long and proud tradition of environmental diplomacy that dates back to our earliest years as a republic. By 1972 Copenhagen Summit, our voice and stand with respect to ecological stewardship, biodiversity conservation, and environmental sustainability was distinct and well-defined. We have sustained efforts to consolidate our role as a champion for conservation in the face of relentless global warming, which has ushered in unprecedented climate change. It has become imperative that we take a strong stand to promote urgent and effective climate action locally and globally. As chair of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change, I had the honor, as I informed you earlier, of co-hosting the inaugural Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, which produced the landmark Nairobi Declaration, a collective position of Africa's pathway to climate action, sustainable investment, and green industrialization. Kenya's role in shaping global climate conversation is a testament to our commitment and our dedication to matters climate. Kenya's engagement in global health diplomacy is also guided by lessons learned from COVID-19 pandemic and our commitment to enhancing inclusion and equity by promoting public and private investment to expand access to quality healthcare, address disparities, and strengthen domestic health systems while partnering to address pandemics and emerging public health challenges, not just in Kenya, not just in our region, but globally. As a national policy priority, Kenya is committed to sustaining its strong contribution to deepening regional integration through various initiatives, including the accelerated implementation of the East African Treaty and protocols, as well as promoting the free movement of people, goods, and services across borders. This commitment extends to our obligation under the Common Markets for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, the tripartite free trade agreement that again came into force this year in May after meeting the threshold, and our efforts to actualize the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. To this end, we have adopted a visa-free policy and the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System to facilitate free movement and promote intra-Africa trade. Let me say this with clarity, that we have championed, we've taken the front line in making sure that Africa trades together, works together, and we ease movement within this continent. It is our voice and the recognition of Kenya's contribution in matters diplomacy around African integration that led the Africa Union in the 37th summit in Addis to ask Kenya to lead the way in reforming the Africa Union to make it a fit-for-purpose organization that can speak to the interests of Africa, the aspirations of the African people. And I want to promise you that I am putting together the report after meeting several stakeholders, and in February, I will be filing the first report to see how we can make the Africa Union a fit-for-purpose organization to drive our integration, to drive our investment and trade, and to make sure that we position our continent as we position Kenya in the right trajectory as we look into the future. On continental leadership and governance, Kenya upholds the Africa Union's Constitutive Act, champions the Pan-African principle of developing and applying African solutions to African challenges, and vigorously promotes Africa's interests and positions in multilateral fora and on the global stage. As I have told you, as the current leader of the AU institutional reforms, we are committed to establishing a well-financed, assertive African Union capable of addressing the continent's challenges and advancing its strategic interests. Despite numerous challenges that have put multilateralism in a crisis, Kenya's commitment to multilateralism endures, and more than ever, we are now invested in strengthening it at both the regional and global level. In all these endeavors, our positions are firmly aligned with the founding principles and constitutive instruments of the Africa Union and the United Nations, while being guided by our national interest. As a member state and host country to major international institutions, including the UN, Kenya has a strong interest in championing for their further empowerment and reform. And that is why I have been in the forefront, and we have been as a country in the forefront in championing the reform of international architecture, whether it is the UN Security Council, multilateral banks and financial institutions, because we need to make them fairer, we need to make them much more responsive, and Kenya has a stake because we host the only UN headquarters in the global south here in Nairobi, and therefore our voice matters. We can speak authoritatively as a country on matters UN, on matters reform of the UN, on matters reform of the financial architecture of the world we live in today, because we have a first-hand experience on handling matters UN in Nairobi. And I am very proud that the UN headquarters in Nairobi is now going to be upgraded so that we can have better facilities to be able to deliver on the mandate that the UN facilities in Nairobi have been assigned. During the recent UN General Assembly Summit of the Future, Kenya reaffirmed the need to reform multilateral organizations and restructure the global financial architecture as a key to ushering our people into a just, inclusive, sustainable, and prosperous future. We firmly believe that the current financial system grossly underserves the deserving majority of the world's population and exacerbates economic crises and inequalities, with 1 in 3 developing countries at the risk of debt default. As a matter of policy, Kenya advocates for the establishment of a fairer and a more equitable financial system. And I am very proud of the strides we have made. There was a time people did not want to listen. Now we've taken the turn, and everybody now accepts that something must be done. I am happy that at the last, we are able to launch this foreign policy document, which celebrates our diplomatic achievements, analyzes current and emerging global dynamics, and also offers firm strategic guidance on the ways and means of undertaking successful initiatives. I've also seen its implementation requires collaboration across all arms of government. I commend the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs for their thorough, consultative, and inclusive manner in which they have undertaken their work, and call upon all of us, all the stakeholders, both in private and public, as well as our local, regional, and international partners to collaborate with us and ensure the successful implementation of this policy. As we embrace this new foreign policy, let us remember that the future is not inherited. The future is created. Through the power of our patriotism, concerted effort, and the strategic framework provided by our foreign policy, we must aim to keep Kenya's flag flying high, to inspire pride and hope, and symbolize Africa's true renaissance. Diplomacy is a field rooted in tradition and techniques that safeguard national interest while uplifting humanity, embodying Kenya's identity as a nation committed to peace, proudly African, and dedicated to global prosperity. Guided by this policy framework, let us get to work in preparing our nation for the dynamic geopolitical landscape that is before us. This foreign policy offers an opportunity to rise and navigate the challenges of a complex world order with a lot of confidence and equally a lot of clarity. I am confident that the work that has been done by our team at Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs is a good document. We look forward to taking it through the necessary processes, both in Cabinet, subsequently to Parliament, and also putting together a sessional paper that will also give fresh impetus to our foreign policy and expand its input to include that from our counties and all the other stakeholders that have been listed by the document. I wish you the very best as we focus on this space that seeks to elevate our participation, our collaboration, and also our partnership with as many a field, whether it is a multilateral field, whether it is on bilateral engagements, and now we are being told there is one called plurilateral engagements. So that whole space and whatever it contains, this document will help us navigate in that space. We will input when the document comes to Cabinet. I am sure Cabinet will also inform this document as has been informed by others, so that we can end up with a document that is fit for not just the present, but also articulate with clarity the medium and the future that we all aspire to. Thank you very much. God bless you. God bless our great country, Kenya. Asanteni sana.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And with your permission, Your Excellency, allow me to invite the Kenya Policy Review Committee for a quick photograph. Let us kindly take our seats briefly If we can kindly take our seats briefly. Let's have the Kenya Policy Review Committee, also to be joined by His Excellency the Deputy President, His Excellency the Prime Cabinet Secretary, the two chairs from National Assembly, Honorable Haika and Honorable Koech. Kindly, if you can also join in this picture as we get to the close and the end of this particular session. We'll have two rows. PS Diaspora, if you can come on this side, please. Then we'll have PS MFA on that side. Then if we can each at the back just take a gap in between. Just find a gap in between. All right. In 3, 2, 1, if we can all be smiles. There you go. Thank you very much. I'll request that we all exit stage except His Excellency the President, and request that the rest of us be upstanding as we are now going to wind up with the national anthem. Our prayer, our closing prayer is our national anthem. So if there be any that are still seated, please let's be upstanding as we prepare to finish with our closing prayer, which is the national anthem. The national anthem. Thank you, Excellency. That brings us to the end of this session. I'll request that we maintain our standing positions as we allow His Excellency to now retreat. Thank you. Do have yourselves a good day and a good afternoon. God bless.